It was around 6 in the morning when I opened the door of my secluded house in the Adirondack Mountains to breathe in the fresh forest air, filled with the scent of pine and morning dew. I, Aidan Brody, a former journalist and now an aspiring writer, was still half asleep and stepped outside in my worn flannel shirt and scuffed boots, yawning and dreaming of a strong cup of coffee to help me wake up and start a new day in my voluntary seclusion amidst the wilderness. At that moment, I froze, as if struck by electricity, because there, just a few steps away from me, stood a massive black bear whose presence seemed to fill all the space around, making the air thick and still. The beast didn't move, didn't growl, showed no signs of aggression, just stood there on my porch, breathing heavily, with a trembling body and matted, partially wet fur, as if it had just emerged from a turbulent river or a fierce battle with an unknown adversary. What struck me most were the eyes of this predator. Dark, moist, almost human eyes, from which tears seemed to flow, trickling down its muzzle in small streams, like from a broken faucet. Never in my life had I seen a wild animal truly cry, and this sight pierced straight to the heart, making me forget the fear of this powerful creature that could crush my skull with a single paw swipe. Only then did I notice that the beast held in its mouth the small, lifeless body of a cub, whose limbs hung limply, and its head was tilted to the side, showing no signs of life, like a rag doll discarded by a careless child. At that moment, I realized that before me was not a bear, but a mother bear with her dying offspring. I wanted to slam the door and reach for the old rifle hanging on the kitchen wall, a natural reaction of a person confronted with a wild animal at their doorstep. But something in the predator's behavior, in this silent maternal despair, stopped me, making me feel that before me was not a threat, but a mother on the brink of a tragedy too deep for me to name. My heart pounded against my ribs as I slowly stepped back, not taking my eyes off the bear, who, to my amazement, took a few cautious steps after me before very carefully, with almost human tenderness, placing her cub directly on the wooden floor of my porch, then stepped back, sat on her hind legs, and stared at me unblinkingly, as if expecting something I couldn't yet understand. Against all instincts of self-preservation, all stories of bear attacks on humans, all ranger warnings, I knelt before the motionless cub, who looked so small, barely the size of a medium cocker spaniel, with protruding ribs and dried blood on one ear. And just when I was almost sure he was dead, his chest barely moved, a slight motion I might have missed if I hadn't been watching so intently. I looked up at the bear, who continued to stare at me with a kind of eerie, conscious expectation, and the words escaped before I could think. "I'll try, okay? I'll try to help him." The bear didn't move, as if understanding every word I said, and with a heart ready to leap from my chest, I carefully wrapped the trembling cub in my flannel shirt and slowly, without sudden movements, retreated into the house, expecting a growl or attack at any moment, but the bear just continued to sit silently, as if she knew something I didn't. Once inside, I laid the cub on the sofa and feverishly began gathering everything that could help: towels, a hot water bottles, acting more on instinct than knowledge, constantly glancing out the window, where the bear remained a motionless shadow, not taking her eyes off my house. The cub was cold to the touch, lethargic, but hadn't yet crossed the final threshold, and I stood in the middle of my living room, holding this tiny, almost lifeless creature in my arms, thinking, what the hell do I do now? At that moment, I realized this wasn't just a strange encounter with a wild animal, not just a whimsical twist of fate. This was something more, something that had chosen me, despite all the laws of nature and common sense. I wasn't ready for this responsibility, but it seemed the bear was ready to trust me, and she stayed, settling at the edge of my property, watching the house all day while I tried to save her cub, who seemed unwilling to leave this world without a fight. The cub lay on my sofa among towels, motionless and cold, and I knelt, gently placing 2 fingers on his tiny ribs, trying to feel a pulse or signs of breathing. Feeling nothing obvious, I held my breath and leaned in close enough to catch the forest, earthy scent of wet fur with a metallic hint of blood, and at that moment his chest barely rose and fell. A weak but real breath, making me exhale with relief. "You're alive, little one. You're still with us." I wrapped the cub tighter in my shirt and hurried to the back room, where I found an old heater, which I immediately turned on full power, spreading all the soft fabrics I could find. Blankets, towels, pillows, creating something like a warm nest for the little patient. His breathing was shallow, his chest barely moving, and his hind leg, upon closer inspection, seemed oddly stiff, as if broken or paralyzed. Around one ear, blood had dried, and it became clear that this wasn't just exhaustion or fatigue. Something serious had happened to the cub. Outside, I heard scratching, and looking out the window, saw that the bear was still there, sitting like an ancient statue, patiently watching the house where her cub was. I picked up the phone and dialed Rachel Kowalski, the nearest veterinarian, though I knew she mainly dealt with farm animals. "Rachel, it's Aiden. I have a cub at home, injured, in very bad shape. The mother brought him to me and left him right on the porch. She's still here, waiting outside." After a long pause filled with disbelief, Rachel finally said, "Are you sure you haven't had too much to drink, Aiden?" "No, damn it, I'm completely serious, and I don't have time to explain. What can I do to keep him alive?" After another pause, she sighed and began giving clear instructions. "Warm him up. Check for any open bleeding. Don't give him solid food yet, only liquids. You can make a honey water solution and give it drop by drop. I'll call Ginny. She used to work at a wildlife rehabilitation center. Hang in there. We'll be there soon." I hung up the phone and went to the kitchen, where I found an old bottle of raw honey. I mixed it with warm water and, using a turkey baster, gently opened the cub's mouth, letting a few drops of the liquid inside. At first, there was no reaction, but after several attempts, his tongue twitched slightly, and I felt a surge of hope. "That's it. Come on, little fighter. Stay with me." I sat beside him for probably over an hour, talking, humming, sometimes cursing under my breath out of helplessness. All the while, the mother bear outside remained motionless. I opened the door slightly, and she raised her head, met my gaze, then lowered it again. This simple movement expressed such unexpected trust that I still remember it and marvel at how a wild animal managed to overcome its fear of humans. By noon, the cub moved his paw for the first time, just a little, lazily, as if checking whether his muscles still worked, and I laughed with relief, not even noticing the tears streaming down my cheeks. "You won't die today, little one. I won't let you," I muttered, looking at the cub, though inside I was panicking, realizing that I was just a writer with a handful of towels and a hot water bottle, trying to save a wild animal I knew nothing about. By midday, my living room resembled a crazy veterinary clinic. Blankets were spread over all surfaces, towels piled up, the heater was running at full capacity, and the cub lay right in front of it, swaddled like a newborn, with one paw sticking out. The wound on his paw started bleeding again, and upon closer inspection, it looked like a bite mark, swollen, red, clearly infected, which could kill him faster than a cold or exhaustion. I took hydrogen peroxide, which I usually used for my own cuts, soaked a cloth, and gently applied it to the wound. The cub flinched, and that made me happy. A reaction to pain meant he was still fighting, his nervous system was functioning. Outside, there was a quiet growl, and I looked out the window again. The mother bear hadn't moved an inch, still sitting there, her massive body motionless, but her eyes tracking every movement, every shadow in the house. I slightly opened the door and quietly said to her, "He's still with us, barely, but holding on." She didn't respond, of course, didn't growl, just sighed deeply, as if understanding the meaning of my words. I went back inside and sat on the floor next to the cub, gave him more honey water, and this time he more distinctly clicked his tongue, trying to lick the sweet liquid, a small but definite progress. My phone rang. It was Rachel again. "Ginny says you're crazy, but she's coming to you with medicine. She'll be there in a couple of hours." Thank God. His paw is bleeding, looks like a bite, and I think he has a fever, I quickly informed her. "Keep him warm. Don't make sudden movements. Keep giving him fluids, and for God's sake, don't open the door wide. That mama bear won't stay calm forever," Rachel warned, and I knew she was right. It was already a miracle that the mother bear hadn't torn down the house wall looking for her cub. But for some reason, she trusted me, and that fact made me even more anxious. An hour passed, then another. The cub began to move more actively, trying to roll over, and I whispered to him, "Take it easy, buddy. It's too early. Just rest." Then he made a strange sound, not a growl, not a squeak, something in between, as if a broken toy was gradually coming back to life. I carefully treated his paw again. The bleeding had slowed. The wound was still red and inflamed, but it no longer seemed so dangerous, and I could work with that. Outside, the mother bear began to show signs of anxiety for the first time. She paced back and forth a few steps, as if her body couldn't decide whether to stay or leave, then sat back in her previous spot. I lit the wood stove to make the house even warmer, even though I was already feeling stuffy. The cub needed warmth, more than I needed fresh air. As evening approached, the shadows shifted, and a small miracle occurred. The cub opened one eye, just one, and looked directly at me. In that gaze, there was no wildness, no fear, only awareness, as if he saw me and understood who I was. "You're not alone anymore, little one," I whispered, feeling a strange warmth inside that had nothing to do with the working heater. He blinked and fell asleep again, but for the first time all day, I felt that he might survive, not a guarantee, not a promise, just a possibility that I hadn't had since morning. When Rachel and Ginny, the wildlife specialist, arrived, the sun was already setting. The mother bear retreated into the forest's shadows but didn't leave, continuing to watch the house from a safe distance. "Oh my God, you weren't kidding," Rachel exclaimed upon seeing the cub, and Ginny immediately got to work, examining the little one with professional focus. "This is a bite from an adult male," she said after a thorough inspection. "Male bears sometimes kill other cubs, so the female goes into estrus again. This little one was lucky that his mother managed to protect him and brought him to you. It's amazing that she chose a human. Perhaps she was watching you before deciding on such a desperate step." That thought made me shiver. The idea that a wild animal could assess me before entrusting me with the most precious thing it had. Ginny and Rachel spent several hours treating the wounds, administering antibiotics, restoring the small body's fluid balance, and when they left, the cub was breathing more evenly, and his paw was professionally bandaged. "We'll leave you the medicine and instructions," Ginny said, packing her things. "But as soon as he gets better, you'll need to return him to the wild. He can't stay with you forever, Aiden." I nodded, though inside I already felt a growing attachment to this little creature fighting for its life before my eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, the cub recovered surprisingly quickly. His wounds healed, his appetite returned, and he began to show curiosity about the world around him, exploring my house with growing confidence. I named him Baxter, just because the name seemed fitting, although I knew I shouldn't name him. Shouldn't get attached to a wild animal that would soon have to return to its natural habitat. The she-bear continued to come every day, sometimes approaching the house, but more often keeping her distance. Always alert, always watching. I left food for her, which she sometimes accepted and sometimes ignored, as if unwilling to become too accustomed to human assistance. One day, when Baxter was confidently moving around the house, playing, and even trying to climb onto the furniture, I received an unexpected visit from Louise Gentry, the deputy sheriff. "Aiden, I've heard rumors that you have a bear cub living with you, and his mother has practically settled on your property," she said without preamble, standing in the very spot where the she-bear had stood with her cub in her jaws 2 weeks prior. I didn't deny the obvious and told her the whole story. She listened with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply said, "You're incredibly lucky no one got hurt. But this is a problem, Aiden. The Wildlife Service is already aware and plans to come in 3 days to take the cub and possibly relocate the she-bear. I could delay this a bit, but the decision is yours. You need to do something." That night, I couldn't sleep. Watching Baxter curled up in his nest of blankets, so homely, so safe, and yet so wrong for a wild animal. I knew I couldn't keep him here forever. Couldn't raise him as a pet. Couldn't deprive him of the chance to be what he was born to be, a free bear in the Adirondack forests. At the same time, the thought of parting caused almost physical pain, as if tearing a part of myself away. In the morning, I made a decision. I didn't wait for the Wildlife Service to arrive, or for the she-bear to come for her cub. I carefully placed Baxter into a spacious container lined with his familiar blankets, added his favorite toy, an old tennis ball, and some food for the journey. Then I got into my truck and headed deep into the forest, to where I believed the she-bear's den might be. Driving slowly along forest roads, I watched for signs of bear presence until I reached a clearing surrounded by dense spruces, where I decided to stop. Getting out of the truck, I opened the container, and Baxter peeked out, blinking in the bright light, sniffing the familiar forest scents. "This is your real home, little one," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. I stepped aside, giving the cub a chance to come out and look around. He took a few hesitant steps, then stopped and looked at me, as if asking what was happening and why we were here. At that moment, we both heard the crack of branches. The she-bear was watching us from the edge of the clearing, alert but not aggressive. Our eyes met, and in hers, I again saw that strange awareness that had struck me on the first day. I slowly stepped back further, showing that I posed no threat, that I was releasing her cub back into the world where he belonged. Baxter stood still, looking from me to his mother, torn between two worlds, between trust and instinct, between human warmth and the call of the wild. The she-bear made a soft sound, something between a growl and a purr, and the cub turned to her, took a few hesitant steps, stopped, and then a few more. My heart was ready to break as I watched the distance between them shrink, as maternal love reunited two beings once separated by cruelty and chance. Just as they were about to touch noses, Baxter suddenly turned and ran back to me, burying his snout in my knees, as if saying goodbye or thank you. I'll never know for sure. I knelt and allowed myself one last stroke of his fur, whispering words he couldn't understand but perhaps felt. "Go live your life, little brave one. You'll be okay." Then I gently nudged him toward the she-bear, and this time he didn't hesitate. He reached his mother in small bounds, and she thoroughly sniffed him, as if making sure everything was okay, that this was indeed her cub, safe and sound. Then something unexpected happened. The she-bear raised her head and looked directly at me. Then, to my amazement, slightly tilted it, before turning and slowly walking into the forest, leading her cub, who looked back only once before disappearing among the trees. I stood in the clearing for a long time, feeling a strange mix of bitterness and satisfaction, loss and rightness, as if closing a chapter of a book I never planned to write, but which changed me forever. I returned to my empty house, which now felt too quiet, too spacious, without the little brown whirlwind turning everything upside down. I gathered the blankets, toys, bowls, all traces of Baxter's stay, and packed them into a box, which I took to the attic, knowing I wouldn't need them anymore, but unable to part with them. Months passed. I returned to my usual life, writing my book, walking in the forest, enjoying the silence. But sometimes, especially at dusk, I would go out onto the porch with a cup of tea and gaze at the forest edge, knowing that somewhere out there, among the trees, lived a bear cub who once slept on my couch and licked honey from my hand. And one autumn morning, I stepped outside and saw a small gift on the porch, a handful of ripe forest berries, carefully arranged in a small pile, as if someone had diligently collected them. There was no one around, but I knew who had done it, and I smiled, looking into the forest where a shadow flickered. Perhaps just a play of light, or perhaps a mother and cub who had briefly been part of my life, letting me know they remembered, that they were okay, that the boundary between our worlds is sometimes thinner than we think. And since then, every autumn, when the leaves begin to change color, I find small gifts on my porch. Berries, cones, once even a beautiful stone, as if someone is trying to say, we're still here, we remember, we're grateful. And it reminds me that sometimes the most important encounters in our lives happen without warning, and the deepest connections are formed in moments when we least expect them. Now, as I write my book, I often think of that she-bear who entrusted me with her most precious possession, and of the cub who taught me that to love means to be able to let go. In a world where the boundaries between wild and domestic seem so clear, they reminded me that compassion knows no species barriers, and trust can arise in the most unexpected places, overcoming fear and prejudice. And when visitors ask me about the unusual wooden bear figurine on my shelf, I smile and say it's just a souvenir from the Adirondacks. But for me, it's something more. A reminder of those few weeks when my home became a refuge for a wild creature, and I briefly became the guardian of another life before returning it to its rightful owner, the endless forest and the mother who never stopped waiting.